This week's Parsha is Parshas Mikeitz. Parshas Mikeitz talks about the famine that spread throughout the living world at that point. Yosef was taken out of jail, and he interpreted Paro's dreams, and the interpretation was that there would be 7 years of abundant grain, abundant food, and then there would be 7 years of terrible famine. Yosef, who was aware of this previously, had decided to store a lot of grain in silos and so on, and there was food in Egypt, there was grain in Egypt, there was somewhat to feed the people in Egypt. But not only that, since the famine had spread throughout the land, from all over people came to Egypt to get food, to get grain, because nowhere else could you find grain. Chapter 42 in this week's Parsha starts with, Vayar Yaakov ki yesh shever b'Mitzrayim. Yaakov saw that there was food in Egypt, that there was a sustenance in Egypt, that they had some way of feeding themselves. So he decides to send his sons to go and get some grain. Now, what's interesting is that why does it say that Yaakov saw that there was food in Egypt? Why would it refer specifically to Yaakov? I'm saying if there was a terrible famine that struck the entire living world, and there was only one place that you could buy grain in Egypt, I guarantee you everybody knew. This is a 7-year famine. You're talking about extremely severe circumstances across the entire world. So everybody knew that there was food in Egypt. So why does it say that Yaakov alone saw there was food? Also, it says that the brothers, at the behest of their father, decided to go to Egypt to get food, to get grain. But when it refers to them, it refers to them as Ache Yosef, the brothers of Yosef, not as the sons of Yaakov. Now, to answer the first question of that, why does it say that Yaakov himself was the only person who saw that there was food in Egypt as opposed to everybody else, is because shever can mean not only food, it can also mean hope. Rashi explains, and he's explaining the Medrash that says that Yaakov saw in a semi-prophecy that there was hope in Egypt. Hope from what? Hope because Yaakov had lost a son. And with that son, the Jewish nation was incomplete. Yaakov was aware that he was now forming the Jewish nation, and he had 12 tribes, which comprise the Jewish people eventually. And he was missing 1/12 of that completeness. He was missing 1/12 of that, and there was an important component. It wasn't just a question of numbers. Yosef brought with him certain characteristics and expertise which were needed to complete the Jewish nation. Without Yosef, there was no hope. But Yaakov saw in a prophecy that there was hope. What does it mean that there was hope? He didn't know. He thought that Yosef had died. So that's what it means when it says that Yaakov alone saw that there was hope in Egypt, that there was hope for the Jewish nation, for the continuity, the completeness of the Jewish nation. Then it calls the brothers of Yosef. It doesn't call them the sons of Yaakov. Why? Rashi explains that the brothers decided they no longer wanted to destroy Yosef. They no longer wanted to kill Yosef or get rid of him. They wanted to find him at all costs. And when they went down to Egypt to get food, they not only tried to get food, they also searched for Yosef. They searched all throughout Egypt. For whatever reason, they thought he was in Egypt. So now what's the connection between these two things? Yaakov seeing the hope and the brothers realizing they're deciding to change their minds about Yosef and find him and bring him back to their father Yaakov. The brothers had decided that they had to get rid of Yosef. Why did they change their minds now? And why did Yaakov all of a sudden have this prophecy that he knew there was hope in Egypt? The answer is it all boils down to one thing. The Yefei Torah says that for 22 years, Yaakov himself was absent from his father Yitzchak's household. Now, that wasn't his own fault, but nonetheless, he was absent from his father's house for 22 years, causing his father a tremendous amount of pain. Now, Yaakov himself has lost his son Yosef, and now is the conclusion of the 22nd year. So after 22 years, Yosef is now, there is hope. And that hope, even though Yaakov doesn't know it, is Yosef. Yosef is actually alive. And the brothers, who were the reason for Yosef's absence, have now changed their minds to now want to find Yosef. And this is all because of the 22 years. because of Yaakov's own absence from his father's household for 22 years. Now at the conclusion of 22 years, Yaakov now sees that there's hope to replace Yosef in Egypt, and the brothers now decide that they're going to go and find Yosef. Just a little tidbit that within these 3 verses at the beginning of the 42nd chapter, there's also another interesting thing. It says, Yaakov tells the brothers, Redu, descend to Egypt. This is a gematria, which you can basically figure out from the letters of the Aleph Bay's numbers. Redu equals 210. 210 is also the time that the Jewish people spent as slaves in Egypt before being redeemed. Now, what is the connection between these psukim, these verses, and the 210 years of enslavement in the land of Egypt? Have a good Shabbos.